Golden Tales.
Seraphina had always understood the unspoken contract of her existence. Her earliest memories were not of carefree play, but of hushed conversations behind closed drawing-room doors. The clinking of delicate teacups, punctuated by sighs of financial distress. The once grand estate, a sprawling monument to her family's fading lineage, was now a constant, chilling reminder of their dwindling fortunes. Every peeling fresco, every creaking floorboard, echoed the quiet desperation that permeated their lives. Her mother, a woman of refined elegance who seemed to shrink a little more with each passing year, would often gaze at Seraphina with a mix of love and a profound, heartbreaking expectation. Seraphina was not just her daughter. She was the last, desperate hope for their resurrection. From the meticulously chosen fabric of her childhood dresses to the curated list of suitable bachelors, Seraphina's life was meticulously orchestrated. She was a carefully polished jewel, destined to be placed in the most lucrative setting. Love, that wild, untamed concept whispered about in forbidden novels, was a luxury their family could not afford. It was an indulgence, a fantasy. Her purpose was clear: to secure a strategic alliance, to merge her impeccable lineage with unquestionable wealth. This was not a choice. It was her duty, a heavy mantle she was expected to wear with grace. So, when the formidable Mr. Alistair Finch extended his proposal, it arrived not as a surprise, but as an inevitable decree. Alistair, a titan of industry whose name resonated with the clatter of stock markets and the hushed tones of power brokers, was a man whose influence spanned continents. His wealth was not merely considerable, it was immeasurable, capable of extinguishing her family's crushing debts with a mere flick of his wrist. He was a man steeped in the worn velvet of age. His eyes, though sharp and intelligent, held the weary, almost melancholic glint of 1,000 intricate deals and countless solitary nights. He was decades her senior, a chasm of experience and years separating them, yet he was impeccably polite, almost gravely so. Their interactions were a series of well-rehearsed formalities, discussions about social calendars, philanthropic endeavors, and the delicate intricacies of estate management. There was a profound absence of warmth, no shared laughter, no intimate confessions. Their engagement was a carefully managed public event, a press release more than a declaration of affection. The wedding day dawned with a deceptive brilliance, the sun's rays glinting off the ornate stained glass windows of the ancient cathedral. Seraphina, enveloped in a gown of shimmering ivory lace that cascaded around her like a waterfall of frozen dreams, felt a peculiar duality of emotion. There was the undeniable triumph, the relief of a mission accomplished, the heavy burden of her family's financial woes finally lifted. Yet, beneath the exquisite fabric and the forced smile, a profound despair gnawed at her. She felt like a beautiful exhibit in a gilded cage, admired, secure, but utterly and irrevocably alone. The vows, exchanged in hushed tones, felt less like a promise and more like a transaction. Alistair's touch was fleeting, his kiss a perfunctory brush against her cheek, devoid of passion. It was a formal sealing of a pact, not an embrace of souls. As she stepped out into the blinding flash of cameras, the cheers of the assembled elite echoing around her, Seraphina felt a strange detachment. Her new life had begun, not with a surge of joy or anticipation, but with the quiet hum of a perfectly executed business merger. She was Mrs. Alistair Finch now, a title that carried immense weight and undeniable prestige, yet in her heart, it felt like an empty echo in the vast, opulent chambers of her new, palatial prison. The silence of the limousine, as it whisked them away to their secluded estate, felt heavier than any chains. She was rich beyond imagination, but emotionally bankrupt. Life within the Finch estate was a study in opulent solitude. Seraphina's days were meticulously structured, each hour accounted for by a retinue of staff who moved with silent efficiency. She ate breakfast alone at a dining table that could seat 20. Her reflection a tiny speck in the polished mahogany. Her afternoons were spent overseeing household affairs, ordering provisions, consulting with the head gardener about the sprawling, immaculate grounds, or attending to correspondence that felt impersonal and cold. Alistair was rarely home, his life a whirlwind of international business deals, leaving her to navigate the echoing corridors of their immense mansion, a phantom in her own grand existence. He was not cruel. In fact, he was unfailingly polite, even generous with gifts, jewels, couture gowns, and exotic furs that only served to emphasize the emptiness she felt. Yet, there was no shared laughter, no gentle touch, no moment of genuine connection. She was a trophy wife, exquisitely maintained, but largely ignored. One blustery afternoon, seeking a reprieve from the stifling formality, Seraphina found herself drawn to the old, neglected conservatory at the far end of the estate. It was a forgotten relic, a vast glass structure, whose panes were clouded with dust and whose interior was a riot of overgrown, untamed flora. The air within was thick with the scent of damp earth and forgotten blooms, a welcome contrast to the sterile perfection of the main house. As she ventured deeper, a patch of vibrant, almost defiant color caught her eye. Amidst the chaos of wilting leaves and snapped stems, a small section of neglected flower beds had been carefully tended. There, nurturing a collection of rare, struggling orchids, was a young man. He was kneeling, his brow furrowed in concentration, his hands smudged with soil. His clothes were practical, worn, and covered in a fine layer of potting dust. He looked up, startled by her presence, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Seraphina felt a genuine jolt. His eyes, the color of warm amber, held a lively intelligence and a hint of unexpected kindness. They were direct, unclouded by the calculating gaze she was accustomed to. He quickly stood, wiping his hands on his trousers, a blush creeping up his neck. "Forgive me, madam," he stammered, his voice rough but earnest. "I did not realize anyone came this way." He was clearly one of the estate gardeners, perhaps new, as she had never seen him before. "It is quite all right," Seraphina replied, her voice softer than she intended, a genuine smile attempting to break through her carefully constructed facade. I was exploring these orchids," she gestured. "They are magnificent. Are you responsible for them?" He nodded, a shy smile finally gracing his lips. "Yes, madam. They were nearly lost, but with a little patience and a lot of care, they are starting to recover. My name is Daniel, by the way." His name was simple, unadorned, and strangely refreshing. In that overgrown, forgotten space, amidst the quiet beauty of struggling life, Seraphina felt a tiny, unfamiliar spark of connection. It was fleeting, unexpected, and utterly unlike anything her gilded world had ever offered. After that first, unexpected encounter, the forgotten conservatory became Seraphine's quiet sanctuary, a clandestine escape from the suffocating grandeur of her life. She found herself drawn there almost daily, not just for the solace of its overgrown beauty, but for the unassuming presence of Daniel. Their conversations began tentatively. Small remarks about the orchid's progress, or the challenging nature of certain rare plants. Soon, however, these horticultural exchanges blossomed into something far deeper, far more meaningful. Daniel was unlike anyone Seraphina had ever known. He spoke not of stock markets or social galas, but of the earth beneath his fingernails, the intricate dance of roots and leaves, the resilience of a tiny seed pushing through hardened soil. His passion for his work was infectious, a vibrant contrast to the detached professionalism she was used to. He told her stories of his humble beginnings, growing up in a small village nestled by a forest, where his love for nature was nurtured not in grand conservatories, but in wild, untamed fields. He spoke of the simple joys, the taste of homegrown vegetables, the sound of rain on a tin roof, the quiet satisfaction of seeing something he had nurtured flourish. Seraphina, in turn, found herself slowly, tentatively, peeling back the layers of her own carefully constructed facade. She spoke of her childhood, not the glamorous facade, but the underlying anxieties of a family struggling to maintain appearances. She confided in him about the pressure she had lived under, the weight of expectation that had shaped her entire life, leading her to her current gilded prison. Daniel listened with an empathy that warmed her to the core, his amber eyes reflecting a genuine understanding she had never encountered from Alistair or anyone else in her social circle. He never judged, never offered empty platitudes. He simply listened. Their time together was a stark contrast to the rest of her existence. In the mansion, she was Mrs. Finch, the elegant, silent ornament. With Daniel, she was simply Seraphina, a woman rediscovering the simple act of breathing. He would often share a humble lunch with her, a piece of dark bread and fresh cheese, perhaps some berries he had foraged from the estate's sprawling grounds. These simple meals, eaten amidst the earthy scent of the conservatory, felt more nourishing, more real, than any elaborate dinner served on fine china in the formal dining hall. She found herself looking forward to these stolen moments, with an intensity that both thrilled and terrified her. The lines between mistress and gardener, between the incredibly wealthy and the decidedly poor, began to blur, erased by shared laughter and the quiet understanding that grew between them like the vibrant, life-giving plants he tended. A dangerous seed had been planted in Seraphine's carefully ordered world, threatening to bloom into something magnificent, yet utterly forbidden. The stolen moments in the conservatory became the true rhythm of Seraphine's days, the only times she felt truly alive. The grandeur of the Finch estate, once her salvation, now felt like a gilded tomb, its opulence a suffocating weight. Alistair's infrequent visits home were polite and predictable, filled with perfunctory questions about her well-being and discussions about social engagements. He never noticed the dirt under her fingernails, the faint scent of earth that clung to her clothes after an hour in the conservatory, or the lightness in her eyes that only Daniel seemed to evoke. She felt a profound guilt, a gnawing unease that she was betraying the very purpose of her marriage. But the intoxicating pull of Daniel's presence was stronger than any sense of duty. One late afternoon, a sudden, torrential downpour trapped them both in the conservatory. The rain drummed a rhythmic symphony on the glass panes, creating a private, intimate world within. Daniel was showing Seraphina a new variety of orchid, its petals a delicate, almost ethereal purple. As he leaned closer, explaining its needs, his hand brushed hers. It was a fleeting touch, barely there, yet an electric current seemed to pass between them, igniting a silent understanding that transcended words. Seraphine's breath hitched. She looked into his amber eyes, and in their depths, she saw not just admiration, but a mirroring of the burgeoning affection that churned within her own soul. Seraphina, Daniel began, his voice a low rumble, raw with unspoken emotion. I look forward to our conversations more than anything. He paused, searching her gaze, a vulnerability in his expression that stole her breath away. This place, he gestured vaguely around the conservatory, it feels like the only real place in the world when you are here. Seraphine's heart pounded against her ribs. She wanted to tell him everything. The crushing loneliness, the emptiness of her life, the desperate yearning for genuine connection. But the words caught in her throat, strangled by the reality of her situation. She was Mrs. Alistair Finch, bound by wealth and obligation. He was Daniel, a gardener, a man of humble means, yet one who had managed to cultivate a garden within her barren heart. The disparity between their worlds was vast, insurmountable. Yet in that moment, as the rain poured relentlessly outside and the scent of damp earth filled the air, the only thing that mattered was the raw, undeniable truth reflected in his eyes and felt deep within her own being. An unspoken confession hung heavy in the air, a fragile, dangerous thing that promised either salvation or utter heartbreak. The unspoken confession, in the conservatory, hung in the air, a silent vow exchanged between two souls from different worlds. Seraphina knew, with a certainty that both exhilarated and terrified her, that she was falling irrevocably in love with Daniel. It was a love born not of grand gestures or societal expectations, but of quiet understanding, shared vulnerabilities, and the profound beauty of being truly seen. This love, however, was a dangerous secret, a fragile seedling, struggling to survive in the barren landscape of her married life. Her trips to the conservatory became more frequent, her excuses more elaborate. The staff, ever discreet, seemed to notice nothing, or perhaps chose not to. Alistair, too, remained oblivious, his attention consumed by his vast empire. Seraphine's guilt was a constant companion, a heavy cloak she wore beneath her expensive gowns, but it was eclipsed by the intoxicating joy Daniel brought into her life. With him, she felt a liberation she had never known, a sense of self that had been dormant for too long. They would discuss everything, their dreams, their fears, the books they loved, the simple beauty of a sunset. He spoke of his desire to one day have his own small nursery, a place where he could nurture rare plants and share his passion with the world. Seraphina would listen, her heart aching with a bittersweet longing, imagining a life where such simple dreams were hers to share. One evening, during a rare dinner with Alistair, a casual remark shattered Seraphine's fragile peace. Alistair, amidst a discussion about property investments, mentioned plans for the estate's neglected areas. We'll need to clear out that old conservatory, he stated, almost as an afterthought, stirring his coffee. It's an eyesore, frankly. Perhaps a new wing for my art collection, or a larger guest house. It will be demolished next month. The words hit Seraphina like a physical blow. The conservatory, Their sanctuary, the birthplace of her fragile hope, was to be destroyed. Her breath caught in her throat, her carefully maintained composure threatening to crumble. This was not just a building. It was the physical manifestation of her burgeoning feelings, the place where she had found a semblance of truth and happiness. And with it, Daniel. What would happen to him? Would he be reassigned, or worse, dismissed? The thought sent a cold dread through her veins. Alistair continued to speak, oblivious to the earthquake he had just unleashed within her. In that moment, Seraphina understood with chilling clarity the stark reality of her situation. Her opulent world, which had offered her security, also held her captive, threatening to crush the only genuine connection she had ever known. The two halves of her life, the one built on duty and the other on desperate love, were about to collide with devastating force. The news of the conservatory's impending demolition plunged Seraphina into a torment she had never known. Sleep became a luxury, her nights filled with vivid nightmares of broken glass and wilting orchids. She knew she had to tell Daniel, but the words felt like jagged shards in her throat. How could she tell him that their sanctuary, the embodiment of their forbidden connection, was to be eradicated by the very man who owned her? When she finally found him, tending to a stubborn patch of weeds near the manor's perimeter, her voice was barely a whisper. "Daniel," she began, her hands trembling, "I have something terrible to tell you." As she relayed Alistair's casual decree, Daniel's face, usually so open and gentle, hardened with a mixture of shock and quiet despair. His eyes, those warm amber eyes that had drawn her in, filled with a deep, profound sadness that mirrored her own. "The conservatory," he repeated, his voice incredulous. "But the orchids, all the work we have put in, the rare specimens." His gaze met hers, and in that moment, the unbridgeable chasm between their worlds yawned wide. He saw not just the destruction of his work, but the brutal reality of her husband's power, a power that could erase their shared haven with a mere word. Seraphina reached out, her hand hovering, wanting desperately to comfort him, to erase the pain from his face. "I am so sorry, Daniel," she whispered, tears blurring her vision. "There must be something we can do, something I can do, ... But what could she do? She was Mrs. Finch, wealthy but powerless, bound by a contract more binding than any love. Daniel looked away, his jaw tight. "There is nothing, Seraphina," he said, his voice flat. "Mr. Finch owns everything. He can do whatever he wishes." He turned back to his work, pulling at the weeds with a renewed, almost desperate vigor, a clear signal that the conversation, and perhaps their fragile connection, had reached its bitter end. The silence that fell between them was heavier than any words, thick with unspoken regret and the crushing weight of their incompatible realities. That night Seraphina confronted Alistair, not with anger, but with a plea, a desperate attempt to save the one place that held meaning for her. She spoke of the conservatory's historical significance, its unique collection of plants. Alistair listened patiently, his expression unchanging. "My dear," he said, his voice devoid of malice but firm, "it is an old, decrepit structure. Sentimental value is not a factor in progress. The demolition will proceed as planned." His finality was absolute. Lying in her vast, lonely bed, surrounded by the silence of the immense house, Seraphina faced the impossible choice. She could remain in her gilded cage, secure and opulent, watching the last vestiges of her true self be razed along with the conservatory. Or she could shatter the cage, abandon everything she had married for, and step into the terrifying unknown, driven only by the love that had blossomed so unexpectedly in her heart. The path ahead was terrifying, fraught with ruin, but the thought of living without the connection she had found, without Daniel, felt like a slow, agonizing death. The morning the demolition crew arrived at the Finch estate was cold and gray, mirroring the turmoil in Seraphina's heart. From her bedroom window, she watched the heavy machinery rumble towards the conservatory, its glass panes reflecting the bleak sky like tearful eyes. Her decision had been made in the agonizing silence of the night, a choice born not of recklessness, but of a profound, desperate need to reclaim her own soul. The gilded cage, once a symbol of security, had become an unbearable prison. She descended the grand staircase, not in her usual pristine silks, but in a simple, practical dress, her small travel bag clutched tightly in her hand. Alistair was at the breakfast table, engrossed in his morning newspaper, utterly unaware of the quiet rebellion unfolding before him. "Alistair," Seraphina said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in her hands. He looked up, a flicker of mild surprise in his eyes. "Good morning, my dear. Are you off to the city?" "No," she replied, her gaze unwavering. "I am leaving." Alistair's brow furrowed. "Leaving? What nonsense is this? Where would you go?" "I do not know yet," Seraphina admitted, a strange sense of liberation washing over her with the honesty. "But I cannot stay here. Not anymore." She did not speak of Daniel, or the conservatory, or the suffocating emptiness that had defined her marriage. She simply stated her truth. Alistair, for the first time, seemed truly unsettled. His initial irritation quickly morphed into a cold, calculated anger. "You will regret this, Seraphina," he warned, his voice low and dangerous. "You will have nothing. No name, no money, no protection. Perhaps," she whispered, a faint, resolute smile gracing her lips, "but I will have my freedom. And that is a price I am willing to pay." She walked out of the opulent mansion without another word, without looking back. The vast estate stretched before her, but her eyes were fixed on the winding path that led away from it, towards the less grand, yet infinitely more promising, gates. She did not know what awaited her. Poverty, hardship, loneliness, all were possibilities. But for the first time in her life, she was choosing her own path, guided by a quiet hope that flickered in her heart. As she stepped through the gates, leaving behind the only life she had ever known, she saw him, Daniel. He was standing by the old oak tree at the edge of the property, a small, worn bag beside him, his gaze fixed on the conservatory as the first wrecking ball swung. When he turned and saw her, his amber eyes widened, then filled with a dawning light. He did not speak, nor did she, but in the quiet understanding that passed between them, a new, uncertain, but undeniably real future began to unfold, built not on gold or obligation, but on the fragile, precious foundation of a love found in the most unexpected of places. They had lost a sanctuary, but perhaps, just perhaps, they had found each other.